Okay, Karuna, are you ready?
Yes, I am. Yes.
Okay, well, I've done the welcome, a half a welcome. It's a full welcome, but maybe it seemed like a half a one. It was a short one. So you're on for the land acknowledgement.
Right. So, hello. My name is Bruna. I'm from the YEC. And today I would like to honor the people whose lands we live on. The Malala, the Cayuse, the Tualatin Kalapuya, the Willamette Tumwater, the Wasco Wishran, the Choctaw Chinook, and the other. We must acknowledge them as the
Put
original
your ears
inhabitants of
on.
the land and recognize we are here because of the sacrifices forced upon them. It is our place and duty to honor the original peoples and their continued stewardship of the land and make it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I'm trying to do two things at once and it's not working very well. So give me a second to pull it together. First of all, let's just set the tone for the evening. I'm excited because we're going to talk about some serious stuff tonight. And my excitement is having great presenters. And then I'll leave it up in the air. And let's get ready. Our mission is to educate and empower the Lake Oswego residents and institutions with the tools to combat racism in all its forms and make Illo and Oregon a better place to live for residents of all races and ethnicities. Tonight, I want to accentuate two words. We want to educate and we want to empower. So you come to the meetings to be educated and to be empowered. And I hope you leave feeling that you've learned something and you've been empowered to go. You feel empowered. You may not have it all, but you do. Our agreements: speak from your own experiences, use I statements, don't generalize others' experiences, listen with full presence, curiosity, and openness to other perspectives. Ask clarifying questions. Assume best intent. Lean into discomfort and challenge biases. Oops and ouch. We may stimulate pain in ourselves and others. So take care of yourself. Step up. If you're not used to speaking or you're a little quiet, step back. If you speak often, and speak up. As I said, if you tend to hold back, listen more. If you tend to talk a lot. Expected outcomes. We'll get acquainted with who's in the room tonight and wanting to respond to racism in LO or wherever you reside. We won't solve racism in 2 hours. You'll leave this meeting with more questions than you came with. You'll have one actionable item that you will identify that you want to do. And you'll have more ideas of how you can interrupt racism. Our youth are important to us. We have the YEC, the Youth Empowerment Committee, and we have Sarah. Are you ready?
Yeah, hi, I'm ready. So I want to talk to you guys today because I know a lot of you are parents, and I want to encourage you to tell your children to apply for the Youth Empowerment Committee. We serve under Respond to Racism, and we plan youth-oriented events. For example, June 19th, we are planning to organize a kids corner where kids can go color, paint, and stuff like that. And you also get wonderful opportunity. So yeah, I encourage you all to sign up. I will be putting the link in the chat in approximately like 2 minutes.
Thank you, Sarah. Our youth are very active and they're very, very, very precious to us. I want to take a minute right now just to say something about youth. We need to hold them in our thoughts, our prayers. It's very difficult for our young people these days. And we have a parent who lost a child last year, a child who took his life because of being bullied on social media. Our young people are very active on social media, and parents, you need to get to understand and see some of what's going on and be a support to your kids. Talk to them, please talk to them, and listen to them. I'll repeat that one again. Listen to your young people, please. We want our young people to have a really full life, happy, and not carrying all the weight of the world from bullying, because some of that does go on. Not some, a lot of it goes on. And social media has been an avenue for it. We have young people who are suffering with anxiety, they're suffering with all kinds of things that might be troubling them. Let's keep an ear out. Let's keep an ear. Let's reach out and support our young people and support our old people who are suffering from some of the same things. And so that's my plea to you tonight for that part. Okay. I had the opportunity to receive an award this year. It was an award from the Rotary Club. The award was Service Above Self, Educational Excellence Above Self in Education Excellence. And so that award was a scholarship for a student. And I had the pleasure of being at the Lake Oswego High School Honors Assembly to see a young man who's done a lot of community work receive the Willie Poinsett Scholarship for Service Above Self in Education Excellence. His name is McAllister Nelson. He goes by Mac Nelson, and he's done a lot of work in the community with hunger fighters, with the Ronald McDonald Club, and a lot. He's just a young man that's reaching out to help others. And so I'm proud of it. I'm proud to have an award named after me and for this year. And so I want to keep on encouraging our young people. All right. We have another great program coming up to us soon. Juneteenth. And Dr. Marvin Lynn will talk some more about it when he gets up. But Juneteenth last year, June 19th, we celebrated Juneteenth in Lake Oswego for the very first time. We had a glorious time. People learned, we shared stories, we had a fun time. And this year, I am happy to say the city of Lake Oswego is joining Respond to Racism in presenting again June 19th, on June 19th, from 4:30 to 6:30. We'll have lots of activities. We heard about the youth doing the corners, because sometimes parents come with younger children who don't want to stand for an hour or sit for an hour, so they can go to the youth corners. But in the meantime, we have entertainment for you. We have singers, we have drummers, we have our young people doing poetry, and we have our own Denmark as the MC and DJ. Denmark has been our MC for several occasions. Those of you who participated in the car rally will remember him with the music, and he just gets you going and motivated. So we're really, really happy to have him. And we have some other guests. And so take a look at our announcements, and we'll get some more. I think Terry is going to give some more announcements at the end. This time, though, I want to introduce Dr. Marvin Lynn, who is from Portland State, the head of, didn't bring your bio, Dr. Lynn, so you can tell them who you are and help me out this time. But Dr. Lynn is going to talk about Juneteenth and give us a little history lesson about Juneteenth. Dr. Marvin Lynn, are you on?
I am. Thank you
And will
very
you
much.
excuse me for not giving you a proper introduction, and then just tell them who you are, and
No worries. I'm Marvin.
including the marvelous voice. He is a trained vocalist. I mean, with a really great voice, and an educator and a supporter and part of Respond to Racism. So he wants to be just Marvin tonight, and I will say, here's Marvin. How's that?
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I just want to do a brief history. I've been asked to do a brief history on Juneteenth so that we can get to the main event. So this is not intended to be a major presentation. Now, you know, you asked a person who's a professor and a scholar, and we're used to doing presentations, and we also used to doing research. And so the more I investigated this, the more I learned. And so I'm excited about sharing some of this information with you. I am trying to share my screen, and for some reason it is not cooperating. Let's see. I don't know why. Did somebody share the PowerPoint? Let's see.
Our tech folks, we're having a problem. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there it is. All right, thank you. Yeah, I need to figure out why that happens. But so Juneteenth, as was said, it currently happens June 19th. And that is the flag that represents Juneteenth. I don't know if you know about this flag, but it was designed, I think, as a way to really honor this holiday. The red, white, and blue represents the American flag, and it's a reminder that the slaves and their descendants were and are Americans. And then the star represents the freedom of African Americans in all 50 states. Let's go to the next slide. A little bit of animation there. So what is Juneteenth? Juneteenth celebrates the end of slavery in the US. It's also known as Emancipation Day, June Independence Day, and Black Independence Day. You probably have heard that with reference to Texas, Galvin in particular, that Black folks who were enslaved in Texas continued to be enslaved for 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And this had to do with Texas's proximity to the rest of the southern states and so on. But it was also just the illegal sort of holding and capture of people, of human bodies by slave owners, when in fact they should have released them earlier. And so the Union Army came into Texas and made this announcement, and they also had the ability at that point to enforce it. And so June 19th, 1865 is when that happened. Thank you. Let's go to the next slide. So what you see here is General Order Number 3, and that is a copy of the original letter that was shared, that was the proclamation that slavery would end in Texas. And let's go to the next slide. You'll see the actual text of that. So the people of Texas are informed that in accordance with this proclamation, all slaves are free, right? And this was intended to set up a kind of work relationship between former slaves and their former masters. The National Archives, which is where I have this document, comments about the last couple of lines there where it says they are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts. There is some, as they argue, racism embedded within that statement, because there were some assumptions about African people and what they would do or not do after slavery. As slavery ended, what you saw is the erection of a whole bunch of black codes, strict curfews. Blacks weren't allowed to gather in groups. They were forbidden from being unemployed. Believe that there were laws in some of the southern states that forbade Blacks from being unemployed. You could be arrested if you were considered vagrant and not working on the street. It also gave rise to the modern police force. So you have some sense of sort of why we are where we are today with policing in the US. This was a sort of sentiment, right? If you've checked out the Hannah Nicole Jones 1619 podcast, she talks about the health consequences of about 4 million freed slaves who were set free in the US, but were given no support and obviously no health support. And there was a lot of illness, a lot of death, and so on. So understand freedom within the context of this sort of rising industrial, prison industrial complex, but also issues around health and welfare for former slaves. Let's go to the next slide. So some key facts about Juneteenth. In Texas, folks have been celebrating it since 1866. It didn't become a state holiday in Texas, though, until 1980, so it took 114 years. The celebrations for Juneteenth are usually community-based, the parades, barbecues. There's always some music, as Willie was talking about earlier, poetry, lots of music offered. I've also seen in some of these celebrations a kind of honoring and recognition of fallen Black soldiers and veterans who fought in various wars. Juneteenth is recognized in 46 states and DC. Oregon began recognizing it in 2001. But we began celebrating Juneteenth in Oregon as early as 1945, and Clara Peoples is lifted up as a person who really brought the celebration to Oregon. Go to the next slide. What you'll see on these slides are covers of books that are out there and that are available for you to check out on Juneteenth. And there are scores and scores of resources. So I just pictured some of them here. Oregon, as we speak, Oregon House Bill 2168 was passed, I think, just a couple of days ago. It will make Juneteenth an official holiday in the state of Oregon. And I love the language in the bill. It talks about the significant cultural and educational contributions of African Americans to the United States and to the state of Oregon. But it also talks about the celebration of freedom, right? And the pushback against systemic racism, that the celebration of June 10th represents all of these things. Governor Kate Brown is in the process of signing this into law. Interestingly enough, she issued a proclamation last year declaring June 19th to be Juneteenth in the state of Oregon. Let's go to the next slide. So here's some resources, and I'll make this slide available to you so you can click on these, but there's so much out there. The information that I drew on for this presentation was the Juneteenth fact sheet, which is a federal government document. There's also lots of information at the National Archives, and all that stuff is available for the most part virtually. And then there's a specific area for African American heritage within the National Archives. There's also a couple of websites, Juneteenth.com. There's another website, Juneteenth National Observance Foundation. This is the group that really helped ensure that Juneteenth was being recognized all over the nation. Next slide. There's some Oregon resources. There's the Oregon Juneteenth Proclamation that you can check out. It's a beautiful document signed by the governor last year. If you want to know more about House Bill 2168, there's a link there. There's also a Juneteenth Oregon website that has information about various activities that are taking place around the state to celebrate and recognize Juneteenth. And then since we're in Lake Oswego, I did a search at the Lake Oswego Library, and there are at least 22 to 25 different resources, including this book and others that you can find, children's books, coloring books, a whole range of things that are out there to teach you and children about the importance of Juneteenth. And I believe that is it. Thank you very much.
You're muted, Willie.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Dr. Lynn. I was saying it's important for us to learn about our history and the history of the United States where we live. So much is left out. And Dr. Lynn is going to be able to help us or help another group because he wears another hat now. He's going to be wearing another hat. He is now a new school board member for, I want to make sure I'm right, Tigard-Tualatin School District. So congratulations on that. That school, Tigard-Tualatin, will have such added value with all that you do, all that you know, and you are such a deep researcher and a wealth of knowledge. So, but leave a little bit of time for us.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I want to just say another, I guess I have to do a poll, get back on task. We have our first poll, and it will take you just a second or two. How many respond to racism community meetings have you attended in the last 12 months? Is this your first meeting? You've been to 2 to 6? You've been to 7 to 12? If you don't remember, just take a guess. Now tell me how we're doing on responses, Pat or John.
Do you see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. For those who are coming for the first time, welcome. Come back again. For those that are in the second round, 2 to 6 times, thank you. And thank you for our royal followers that have been here for 7 to 12 meetings. Thank you so much. And that ends the first poll. And, oh, was I supposed to give this percentages?
No.
Oh, okay. I was like, okay, I moved along. I want to give out thanks to Catherine Phelps. Those of you who have young children or young grandchildren or young children that you know and would love to be a part of a story time, Catherine does more than reads a story. And the kids are learning so much. I think about the language that they're getting, the new words and things that they're getting, because she explains everything, has meaningful questions and discussions with them, and gives the kids a chance to respond to what she's doing. And it's been just, I don't know, glorious to watch him and listen to the remarks and looking in the chat room. I tell you, these little ones know how to write in the chat room real early, so they know technology. But it was so well received that we're using some of our grant money to have this story time every week for the summer. Kids will be out of school, and here is a way to keep them engaged in reading, and we're also giving away little books at times, and we'll let you know. But tune in. It's 5 o'clock every Monday, and there are 2 Mondays. It's near the end of the summer, though, so you don't have to worry. From now on, every Monday, 5 o'clock, tune in. But you have to sign up, register for story time, and spend a half an hour with Catherine Phelps, who is just a fabulous educator. Have story time with children, preschoolers, elementary school level kids. Let's have it. Let's go for it. I want to thank Ella for Love for inviting us to walk with them in the meditation walks, that partnership with the Elo for Love. They're wonderful. They're wonderful times for us to be just with ourselves in the midst of a group, to be silent for 20 minutes, just to be able to meditate and think about what could happen, how racism might change, what kinds of changes do you want as we talk about dismantling racism in Lake Oswego and other places wherever you live. I want to also thank the library for co-hosting the film that we showed last month, Samurai in the Oregon Sky, Lana Soul's film. It was a wonderful film, and we had a nice discussion afterwards. I want to also thank all of those who participated in the Equity Summit that was put on by the city and the school district. A spirit of unity. That's how we're trying to do it. A spirit of unity with the city, the school district, and community organizations like Elo for Love and Respond to Racism, who are very, very, very much interested in doing the work of social justice here. Last month, we had a panel for our Asian American Pacific Islander celebration and acknowledgement. It was a celebration, but it's also an acknowledgement of the people who live here, who have to go through things because of their skin color or their nationality. And we are really fighting against that. We want to dismantle that. And it hasn't been safe for our Asian American Pacific Islanders, particularly this year. But we keep them in your thoughts and prayers as we hope that we can eradicate this bad behavior. But last month's panel was Kimby Tu, our own Tam Hickson, our personal Respond to Racism's personal graphic artist. I like to say that. Alicia Lee, Olivia Chi, Devorah Aurora, Marshall Cho, Wei Wei Lau, and Daniel Wen. And I also want to thank the city for co-sponsoring the event downtown at the Millennium Park, acknowledging the Asian American Pacific Islanders month. That was last month. This month is Pride Month, and we are going to be showing a film, I think it's June 18th, but for our LGBTQ, trans, or questioning young people and old people, we need to be able to embrace them. And I want to also thank the city again. Lake Oswego is stepping up to the plate, and I'm excited about it. The city, has put in money this year to help us put on Juneteenth so that we can pay the artists who are performing something. We ask, and I get called on it many, many times about asking, particularly people of color, BIPOC people, to come out and perform or say something, present, or whatever for free. And we want to stop doing that and give them something, because they're using their time, they're dealing with their own pain and trauma to come and speak or perform for us. But on Juneteenth, it's going to be a celebration. So we're going to do happy. We can't have food because of COVID, but we will have a good time there anyway. And I think I've covered all. Our next poll. Poll number 2 is up now. Did you take at least one action in support of our Asian American Pacific Islanders community during May? Have you reported a bias crime or discriminatory incident? Have you ever reported one? Have you signed up for bystander intervention training? And have you supported, oops, I have to get the rest of them. Have you supported a local Asian American Pacific Islander owned business? Have you participated in any of the Asian American Pacific Islanders heritage activities last month? And have you learned from Apano, Respond to Racism, ELO for Love resources? Have you learned anything from those resources? And any other thing that you've done? In the last month. How are we doing? All right. Did you take it? Oops, I was about to share. Can I get it back up? 76% of our people said they took at least one action in support of our AAPI community during May. 92% of our people said no, they had not reported a bias crime, a discriminatory incident. So we had 8% who has, but 92 have not. And so we're going to give you some information tonight so you'll learn how to do it. We had 16 people sign up for bystander intervention training, and 84% who said no, and they may not know what it is. So we have to check it out. 84% have supported AAPI-owned businesses, and we have 16% who haven't. And 51% participated in some of the Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month activities, and 49% didn't. And we have 84% who've learned from APANO, Respond to Racism, LO for Love resources, and 16% who haven't. And so we need to know how we can help you. And with that, I will close that part. Thank you. So tonight, we are very happy to have two presenters here from the DOJ's office. Faye Stetz-Waters is the Oregon DOJ Civil Rights Director. Faye Stetz-Waters is a Baltimore native. She's a graduate of Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, and Lewis and Clark Law School. Her legal practice focuses on administrative law and civil rights law. She coordinates multi-state litigation, serves on national work groups on civil rights, labor rights, and education rights, and we're honored to have her here tonight. With her is Johanna Costa. She is the DOJ Bias Hotline Coordinator. Johanna Costa is Oregon's DOJ's Hate Crimes and Bias Incidents Response Coordinator, where she provides direct support to survivors of hate and bias. She has dedicated her career to supporting vulnerable victims and survivors, including in federal, state, and tribal courts in Indian country in the District of Oregon. As the director of a local county DA's office victim service program and advocating for sexual and domestic violence survivors in a community-based response program. Let us welcome Faye and Johanna tonight. Faye, you want to get started?
Thank you so much, Willie, and thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. I am just amazed by all the work that's going on in Lake Oswego, and it's always just fascinating to hear, especially when we hear stories from all around the state, and so it's always nice to be working with folks who are interested in progress and change. So as I was listening to Dr. Lynn's presentation, I was just elated because last week, when the Juneteenth bill, House Bill 2168 was scheduled for its final legal review, it was sent to my desk as an email, and I got to review it for its finality on constitutional issues before it was sent to the governor's office. So I was very, very, very grateful to have that role. When we talk about, and I've been talking about safety for quite some time. So safety is a big thing for me. If you don't feel safe, you know, the things working up here in the upper regions of the mind and the brain and the frontal cortex don't work the way they're supposed to. All of your energy is outward and looking for threats. And so and it's a heightened state, and it causes, you know, all kinds of harm. So safety is important, and it is at the heart of what we do. And unfortunately, in Oregon, we've had a lot of people report that they didn't feel safe, were not safe, and have been harmed. And we are looking at our hate crimes bill. I'm going to call it hate crimes because that's what people understand. It was renamed bias crime and bias incident law in 2019 under Senate Bill 577. The name of our legislators that you see here, Senator Frederick, Senator Przansky, Representative Power, Senator Manning, all those listed in capital letters on this slide, you can thank them for their participation and leadership in helping to get this law changed. A little background about Senate Bill 577. It was formerly called our intimidation statute. And it was passed, the first time it was passed was in 1981. And it was based on a model statute that the Anti-Defamation League handed out to all of the states to address what was then hate crimes that was largely perpetrated by gangs of so-called skinhead gangs that were beating up people. And so that's really where a lot of the language was directed at, was to get at those groups of people who were going out and targeting people. Well, you know, fast forward a couple of decades and a bit, and we have had an uptick in hate crimes in Oregon, really violent stuff, culminating, leading up to the 2016 election. In August of that year, Lionel Bruce Jr., a Black teen, was killed by a white supremacist in Portland. And then we had the awful killings on the Max. Attorney General said, hey, wait a minute, something's going on here. We need to revise our laws here to get at these actors who are doing these bad things. And so she had a task force, went around the state, collected stories, heard directly from victims who experienced hate crimes, and learned that there were gaps in law enforcement's response, gaps in prosecutors' response, and try to update the statute so that it more accurately reflected our times. And so this is one of the reasons why it was named a bias crime and bias incidents, changing from intimidation law to bias. It has a number of key changes. So it basically, for the crime, it changed the name from intimidation to a bias crime. And we're looking at, and I'll get into this a little bit more so we can talk about what this language is. But the bias crime law and bias incidents only apply to a certain subset of what we call protected classes. When the Attorney General and all the research and all the data showed that race and color, religion, disability, national origin, sexual orientation, and gender identity are the bases upon which people are getting targeted. So those are the identities that we carry, that we can't change, that bigots are going and attacking us for. So these are the ones that are captured in the statute. Now, certainly there are other people, other identities that are targeted, but they are not a part of the statute. There are other laws in our statutes that provide for different protections for them. So we were trying to look at people who are the basis upon which people are targeted to most to get at the root of this problem. So that's why you see that language there. And we also have the bias incident. Bias incident is not a crime, but it is still a hostile expression of animus. I can't stand this person. I'm going to hurt this person. I'm going to threaten this person. I'm going to put this person in and place this person in fear because of how I perceive their race, their color, their religion, disability, national origin, sexual orientation, or gender identity. So the same protected classes apply to both bias crimes and bias incidents. Now, this is a case where we're talking about, say, maybe everything from a microaggression to something would ordinarily be a crime if you knew who did it. So if we talk about something like anti-Semitic graffiti that was left on a postal box or something like that, we didn't see who did it. So if you call the police to tell them to respond to something like that, they might say, well, yeah, that would be a crime if we knew who defaced the property or who destroyed the property, but we don't. So we don't have probable cause to arrest anyone. A case like that would be considered a bias incident. Free speech, people calling each other names, all kinds of vile names, hateful names. That speech, unfortunately, is protected speech. You can get to say any nasty thing you want to a person. You can't threaten the person. You can't threaten the person with violence. You can't use a weapon. If you do threaten a person with a weapon and you're making racist statements as you do so, that's a bias crime because of the threat of violence and the weapon. So one of the other key change to this bill was that it created a hotline. It's a statewide hotline requiring Department of Justice. It's Housing Department of Justice. Johanna answers that phone. And it's requiring us to provide trauma-informed and culturally competent support services to anyone who contacts the hotline. So as you can imagine, with one person running a statewide hotline, she's been pretty busy. And 2020, we'll talk about some numbers, but we've been pretty busy trying to get this hotline up and running and trying to provide these services and connect people in their community to help. The new law created some reporting requirements. Part of the reason to collect data, which is what our hotline is supposed to be doing, in addition to supporting people, to collect data about who's doing what to whom, where is it happening, what's the nature of the crimes and incidents that are being reported, who's doing it, who's being prosecuted for, arrested and prosecuted, what are those sentences, and the whole criminal justice process is looking down at bias crimes and bias crimes. So what is a bias crime? We're talking about the really serious stuff that sends you to prison. And for those of you who don't know, there's a difference between jail and prison. Jail, you can stay in jail for up to 6 months. It's for misdemeanors. If you stay on 364 days out of a year, you can stay in jail. That's in your local county jail. There'll be Clackamas County Jail over on what is it? I forget, or his city, and so that's jail. But prison is a state-run organization in incarceration situation where you are there for at least a year. So with crimes, when we're talking about crimes, we're talking about felonies, and we're talking about misdemeanors. But the big stuff are the felonies that send you to prison for a year or more, and the misdemeanors will send you to jail for up to a year. So those are two classifications, and we're threatening a person, we're damaging a person's property, we're threatening their family, and we're assaulting people either with our hands or a weapon. And we're doing so because of how we perceive that other person's race, color, religion, gender identity, sexual orientation, disability, or national origin. Even if we're wrong, if I decide I'm going to attack Willie because, I think that Willie's is from Haiti or something, and I'm wrong about it, it doesn't matter. Because my perception is he was a person who was from Haiti and thus not an American and thus doesn't belong here and go back to your country and that sort of thing. Those are the kinds of things we're talking about. So I'm not going to bog you down with a Class C felony. I don't want you to have to wade into that language too much, but to just know that felony is the most serious crime, and it means you've got a prison sentence for 1 year or more. A misdemeanor means it is a crime, not as serious as a felony, which you go to local jail 364 days max. And so there was when we rolled out this law in 2019, it came out June. It was signed June 19th of 2019, before we started celebrating Juneteenth. But this was signed into law and became effective upon passage. And immediately, people were clamoring. Police didn't know, what is bias? I don't know how to figure out what that is. How do we prove what was in the mind of a criminal at the time they did X, Y, and Z? If they say something, if they have tattoos, that makes it a little more obvious that they had a hateful intent. But how can we tell that they were solely motivated by hate? That's not the standard. The standard has been cited in State versus Hendricks, an Oregon appellate court decision upheld by the Supreme Court in 1992, saying that if there was if bias played any role, not the sole role, but any role, in whole or in part, in this person's decision to do this awful thing, then it creates liability, criminal liability. So it helps prosecutors, it helps police who are searching for, well, why did the person, do this act? Well, you don't have to say it was wholly because of bias. It can be in part due to bias or hate. So that is a case law that a lot of officers don't know about, a lot of young prosecutors don't know about. Multnomah County has a very skilled bias prosecutor who makes sure that young deputy district attorneys are aware of this case law, so it is on point. I'm going to turn the microphone over to my colleague so she can talk to you about some other ways for a law enforcement to be able to understand this subtle change.
Thanks, Faye. Hi, everyone. Johanna, Costa, she, her, hers. And we wanted to share a little bit about how we talk about bias crime to law enforcement and to prosecutors when we at DOJ are trying to help educate them about how they go about prosecuting cases. And a lot of the times, law enforcement and prosecutors look at standard formulas when they are looking at a case. They're looking at a requisite mental state. Was it a negligent act, or was it an intentional act? Was it a knowing act? Was it a reckless act? When we're talking about formulas, very commonly law enforcement will look at theft plus force creates a robbery, or menacing plus a weapon creates the crime of unlawful use of a weapon. And so we put together some formulas for law enforcement when there's bias motivation, when there are slur words, when there is mimicking, mocking, any type of bias evidence, plus the crime of harassment. We're talking about bias crime in the second degree. When we're talking about bias motivation plus menacing, we're minimally talking about bias crime in the second degree. So we laid out these formulas so that they would have some general basis for prosecuting these cases. One of the great things that Senate Bill 577 did, though, was create something called a bias incident. This is a legal term under the law, and Faye described it as a hostile expression of animus relating to somebody's protected class. And a bias incident sometimes could be a criminal act where there's no probable cause or the suspect isn't able to be determined. But generally, we're talking about slurs. We're talking about misgendering or intentional dead naming, or we're talking about targeting someone with discrimination, making them feel unwanted, unwelcome, like they don't belong. So a bias incident are those things that happen maybe in the workplace or at school or between neighbors that aren't necessarily criminal in nature, but the idea is to try to make someone feel like they don't belong, that they're not part of this community, that they are unwelcome. The bias incident statute requires that if a victim contacts law enforcement and reports a bias incident, that law enforcement is required to refer folks to the hotline. One of the things that the Attorney General on her listening tour determined was that, and heard from the community, was that folks were tired of focusing on perpetrators in the criminal justice process, that commonly didn't hold folks accountable, that commonly centered the focus on the bad act and didn't provide support and services to the victim. And so the reason that the hotline was created was to create a space where folks could report, feel safe, feel validated, feel heard, and have an opportunity to mourn that experience and talk about options for some next steps and some community support. And so when a victim contacts law enforcement and reports something that does not rise to the level of a bias crime, law enforcement is required to refer folks to the Bias Response Hotline. It's best practice and you probably should, or it's a really good idea. We really think folks would benefit from this. It actually says the word shall, and for any attorneys in the room, that's that key word that says there's no wiggle room here under the law. We learned that law enforcement really wasn't prepared or trained to respond to bias. That is something that community has known for decades. And here at DOJ in the government, we learned the hard way. Unfortunately, Senate Bill 577 did not include any mandated training for law enforcement. And law enforcement we have provided some tools to help bring law enforcement up, to rise to the occasion, to serve all community members, not just those from dominant culture. And so we have provided a number of tools, including supplemental report forms, language about how to respond in a compassionate and empathetic manner, what the law says, referral cards with QR codes that they can scan to make that referral as easy as possible. An online reporting portal so that it would be easy for law enforcement to report into our system. So we really tried to take down the barriers for law enforcement to respond in a better way. We thought, in talking to the planners for today's meeting, we wanted to give some specific tips about interfacing with law enforcement based on our experiences on the hotline, what we hear from folks in terms of frustrations with law enforcement. This is not saying that you have certain obligations and law enforcement doesn't. This is trying to reduce the barriers for you to get best services from law enforcement if you report something to law enforcement. So we've laid out some tips here. And again, we're not trying to say that you have certain obligations in a moment of trauma and fear and crisis, but we wanted to provide some tips and tools to be able to interface with the system with some greater ease. So first and foremost, asking the question, who do I report to? A lot of the times folks have a misunderstanding of the hierarchy that, hey, I tried to respond to Lake Oswego police and they were terrible. So I'm going to go up a notch and I'm going to report to Oregon State Police, or I'm going to go up a notch and report to the FBI. And that's not actually how it works. The Oregon State Police has no authority over Lake Oswego Police. DOJ does not have authority over the Lake Oswego Police. The FBI does not have authority over Lake Oswego Police. So when I report to a patrol officer, and if I get bad service, my next step would be to go to the sergeant on duty. And my next step after that would be to make a complaint through their complaint process, and whether that's speaking to a captain or someone with internal affairs or with the police chief. So the hierarchy is within the agency, and then it's to the local board in the city that pays the salaries, the municipality that pays the salary of the police department. And then it potentially could be to the certification board in Oregon. So being aware of that hierarchy. Anytime that a person experiences bias, I want to offer the hotline as a resource, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But in terms of when I talk to the police officer who responds, a lot of times I hear folks report, well, there was damage to my property, and the thing that was damaged was so valuable, it was priceless to me. I couldn't possibly replace it. Well, priceless or sentimental equals $0 to law enforcement, and therefore is not damage, and therefore is not a crime. So put a dollar amount on something. Report pain. If someone contacts you and you have any type of pain, if someone punches me, that could be the crime of harassment if I don't report any pain. If I report pain, then it becomes the crime of assault. If you have been injured, don't be tough. Don't grimace through it. Report the pain and report it accurately. If someone makes repeated contact with you when they've been told not to contact, even if the repeated contact was just a hello, it doesn't matter. Report that contact. Report pain. Report fear and concern for safety. Part of, under protective order statutes, law enforcement is looking for fear of imminent physical danger. And if you say, oh no, I'm not afraid of him, I can protect myself. Law enforcement is looking at certain legal definitions under the law. So report pain, report fear. Use the words hate crime. We're finding over and over when we talk to law enforcement that they don't know the word bias or bias crime. Be specific about the language, the slurs, and explain how it targets a protected class. We're finding that law enforcement often doesn't know what a specific slur word is, or what it means, or how it is harmful. So if someone calls you a word, don't say he yelled obscenities at me. Say he said racial slur words, and I'm going to write them down for you, or I'm going to spell them out for you, and you better put those exact words in your report. Ask them to write a report. You yourself as a victim, take notes during or immediately after your report with law enforcement. Who responded? What agency? And what's the person's full name? Ask for their business card. Take down a case number. If they're saying, no, there's no case number, there absolutely is. There would then be a CAD number if they're saying it's not criminal. Note the time. Write down license plate. Ask all witnesses that are around if they don't mind giving you their names and their contact information. And then every time you interface with the system, write down. At 8:07 on Tuesday, January 4th, I spoke to Johanna Costa on the hotline. She told me X, Y, and Z. We decided that I would A, B, and C the next time, you know, in the next week. So write down those notes. And if you don't get the referral to the hotline after reporting, targeting, bias, hate crimes, then hold law enforcement accountable. Is there a hotline that you're supposed to refer me to? I don't know about anything about a hotline. Oh, actually, let me tell you, there's a law that says you're required to refer me to the hotline. Call the police chief. Hey, your officer so-and-so didn't make a referral to the hotline. These are all things that I can help with on the hotline, but again, I wanted to provide some tools. I regularly follow up with law enforcement about lack of referral. I regularly follow up about these types of interactions. So on the hotline, you can reach us at 1-844-924-BIAS, or 2427. You can use 711 Oregon Relay. For folks who are deaf or hard of hearing. We have interpreters in over 240 languages. You can report anonymously, either on the phone or online. Our website's available, and our reporting portal is available in 8 different languages at standagainsthate.oregon.gov. Just a very brief process about going through the hotline. We go through an informed consent process. We make sure that you are making an informed decision about engaging with us. We are focused on safety. You drive what happens. I don't take your information anywhere without you. And we do collect data, as I mentioned. I wanted to show you a few slides just so you had a general idea of what it looks like on the hotline. We don't ask very many questions. We limit the number of characters. So you're indicating what targeted protected class was indicated in the bias that you experienced or you witnessed. Again, folks can report as victims or as witnesses, briefly describing the incident. And then there's lots of information that is not required. You are not required to include your name or your phone number or your email. And you can indicate if you want follow-up from the hotline. Wanted to share some quick information about reports in 2020. So 62 reports from Clackamas County in 2020, and in 2021, 133 reports already this year. We've had over a 450% increase of reporting to the hotline in 2021. And I'll open the floor for questions. I don't know if there's questions in the chat, and I'll let Faye facilitate this part of our conversation.
There we are. Osa, I have been responding to things in the chat. Looks like we had a couple of questions. Last question, it says here, well, one question I responded to was employees at the South Metro transfer station had slurs and a noose left at their work site. Neither of these are against the law. Am I correct? And I wrote, not crimes, but bias incidents. Although now, due to a recent change in the law, displaying a noose with the intent to intimidate is now a crime. These were bias incidents. It's not a crime. Well, when the governor signs that bill into law, that's just, it's sitting on her desk. It will become law. Those types of laws usually become effective upon passage because of an emergency condition written in there. If there's a crisis like we're experiencing, so it will likely be a law very quickly. so the folks at the work site, their situation is likely a hostile work environment if they've reported it to the employer and the employer doesn't take any steps to mitigate what they're experiencing in the workplace, that racism. So not a crime, not a nice work environment either. So to that, the next question, someone mentioned like what was happening at OSU. And I wrote in response to your presentation while you were talking that you put a dollar amount to your valuables. They are valuable, but the police won't value them, and it will diminish what your report looks like if you don't put a value in there. Same thing with pain. So those things do matter, those details. So someone said again, it was their understanding that law had not yet been signed. It's true, it's not been signed into law by the governor, but it is on her desk. If an incident is directed at an individual who is not in the protected class, but is targeted because of their support of others, is that a bias incident? It is a bias incident. So, and I guess when you say you're in a protected class, so maybe you're a person who is not a person with disabilities, but you are supporting a person who does have disabilities. If the bias is targeted at you because of your support for this other person, still bias incident. We've talked about, Johanna and I have talked about a gap in the statute. It's this association with people, where you have a freedom of association to associate with others, support other people, like in the First Amendment. That type of support for other people is lacking in the statute, and I do think it needs to be clear. Because sometimes when you're interacting with law enforcement, the question, well, how does that affect you? You're not disabled. You're not a person with disability. So they weren't targeting you on that basis, and you're not protected under the statute. I don't know that many police would know that, but that is a potential response. And I think it's a gap in the statute, and it's something that we can fix legislatively and amend. Let's see, there are 2 more messages in the chat. I'm just playing catch up here.
And
Someone asked,
oh, sorry, I was just going to say, just as a note, the data. So I usually give a preempt with these slides about data, that this is the Johanna data version. You can see that this is my best effort in a PowerPoint slide, but we have a wonderful data dashboard on our website at standagainsthate.org and .gov. I believe the second link on our menu is our data dashboard, and I can put it in the chat as well. But it is an interactive dashboard that breaks down. You can click on the county and see the breakdown by protected class. You can click on a month and see what happened in that particular month by protected class. So it's all interactive, and it's a much more nuanced version, so you can see what is being reported in the state. I hesitate to say what's happening in the state because we know that this is just the tip of the iceberg, but our data dashboard is available by year, by month, by class, by location, by conduct, and by bias determination on our website.
and we know that bias incidents are greatly underreported. There's a number of barriers that are presented in reporting. People don't feel safe. You then have to report something horrible that happened to you to someone who may be indifferent, may even be hostile, may be dismissive. So there's a lot of reasons why people are reluctant to report to law enforcement. Our office becomes a safe option for people reporting. We don't take names. We have one of the provisions of the law prohibits us from disclosing the identities of people who have contacted our hotline for support. So we become a safe option. And we, because we're trauma informed, we allow people to tell us how much information they want to share, when they want to share, how they want to share. And so sometimes it means we don't get the complete picture. Sometimes it means we're not able to classify it, whether it was bias or not, because we don't have all the details. But it's important that a person who's experienced a bias crime or bias incident have a safe place to be able to share that with. And we hope that that we build up enough community support so that we have community organizations who specialize in this kind of support to be able to connect them with. So it's a really important piece that had been missing prior to the statutory changes of Senate Bill 577 that we're very glad is present, because it matters how you respond to a person who's experienced bias. How you respond in the aftermath of that really matters. And we have found that our law enforcement and our prosecutors can do a better job in listening and understanding what's occurred. Okay, so this is when I reported a bias incident to up here, when I reported bias incidents in Lake Oswego, the officer on the phone told me that that was not a crime and he didn't know anything about the database. Then I called the police chief who took care of the incident reporting. You know, so many times we have found that leadership in law enforcement knows, and that it's very hard for the rank and file patrol officers to get that information. One of the reasons we made referral and resource cards was so that the officers on the street could then read them and then also distribute them to make it easy for them to be able to contact us if it was not a crime that law enforcement was going to investigate. A key piece, I think, that it has been a breakdown in this implementation statewide is that the communication piece. The language we provided to law enforcement, we provided it strategically because we assumed from the reports that we had that they were not well versed in this area, had difficulty identifying bias, and maybe because of the work that they do, what happened to you, this name that was called, this sign that was stolen, this car that was damaged, may not seem as important when you're dealing with, you know, trying to find the person who shot up the place. So maybe it's but it is important, and it's part of your job to respond appropriately to each and every one of these things that are reported.
And Faye, if I could add on that the best place to report a bias incident, if you're if you don't have present concerns for your physical safety, the best place to report a bias incident is to the hotline. I will tell you that there are only 2 law enforcement agencies in the state that are reporting bias incidents. That is not a requirement under the law. It is a best practice, and Lake Oswego Police is not one of them. So if the police chief told you that he took care of the reporting, I haven't gotten any reports from the Lake Oswego police chief. So bias incidents are best reported to the hotline. We have folks who report something that happened today, just now, and we have folks who report things from 1979 when I was a student at PSU and this happened. So folks are welcome at any point to make a report.
And I see that someone noted hate graffiti, bias graffiti, definitely report that. That is a community harm. When it's allowed to stand and be seen over and over, it sends a message and a hateful one. So it's very important that those get reported. Police departments, cities have abatement crews that can come out and paint over that stuff. So let's see here.
And I see a question about what does not reported mean in the data. I think it's a couple of places. Sometimes folks call the hotline and say, hi, you know, my name's Mary, here's my phone number, I need to report a hate crime, and they hang up. And then I call them back and I don't get any further information. I don't get any information about their protected class or what the conduct was or things like that. So, and I don't know their location. So, not reported could mean I don't know where, or I don't know what, or I don't know who was targeted.
So someone reported that there were 2 signs that were defaced, and then asked, and apparently law enforcement asked if I was a homeowner and was told that you could not report it. I think most places you can report anything that that you see. Whether the person does anything about it is another question. Again, because Oregon is I come from the East Coast, and it was kind of shocking to me that Oregon is such a local control state. But the good thing about that is you as a member of the Lake Oswego community can go in and, you know, ask your leadership about a policy change or an ordinance change, that these policies and ordinances are things that are just written by city council, to kind of govern how your community operates. So if this is an important issue around, you know, graffiti or race, hate graffiti, then you could propose a change that if anyone who sees it, whether it's on their property or not, can report it. And that's something that could be adopted. So there's so many ways that the local community has to influence change. And I want and hope that people feel empowered to be able to do that. Lake Oswego, for the large part, is a very wealthy and, you know, community that has a lot of resources, and those resources should be brought to bear when a problem has been identified. So let's see what else we have.
So there's a question that says, so the data does not include local reports made to local law enforcement. And to that, I'll say it depends. There are sometimes, so the law does not require that law enforcement refer bias crime victims to the hotline, only bias incident victims. Some law enforcement agencies follow our best practice and refer folks no matter what for support. And so sometimes there is an overlap. I would say that there are probably fewer than 20 overlapping data points in our 1,700 reports to the hotline thus far. The Criminal Justice Commission captures data from the hotline and bias crimes that law enforcement agencies receive and bias crimes that prosecutors' offices receive. And so if you go to the top of the dashboard, you can see the full report. There's an annual report that they publish every July 1st. So the next one will be out in a few weeks. And that report has all of the data, but the hotline only receives the reports that we receive. Some are bias incidents, some are bias crimes, about 27% are bias crimes. And then, and very few of those are in overlap with local law enforcement.
You know, and it's interesting because, you know, many law enforcement agencies report 0 hate crimes. In Oregon, all the law enforcement are supposed to report to state police the number of bias crimes that occurred in their jurisdiction. Many times they have to report that, but it's also a voluntary report that they make to the feds. The feds want this information, that the information usually comes through the state police. They do a report from all of the law enforcement jurisdictions that reported to them this year. And then they send that information to state police, and state police is supposed to send it to the feds and file this uniform crime reporting report. And this is supposed to give us a picture of how many hate crimes were in our jurisdiction, but many jurisdictions send in 0. Nothing happened in our state, nothing to look at here. And it's a problem because it misrepresents the conditions on the ground. It misrepresents the sense of safety that people who have been targeted experience and feel. And so you might ask your local law enforcement, how many bias crimes do you report to state police this year? How many did you investigate? How many did you report? Because, and there are a lot of reasons why people don't, there's a reason not to report hate crimes. If people sense that, you know, your neighborhood is unsafe, people won't move there. Companies won't invest dollars there. And so it's really not honest. It's dishonest to not report the actual situation on the ground. People need to know. They shouldn't be surprised when they move to an area and find, you know, that there's a, you know, Klansman living next door or on the school board or whatever it is. And it's so they need to beef up their reporting. A part of the data that we capture and we work with the Criminal Justice Commission is to show there is more here. And as Johanna said, sometimes it does not neatly overlap what we have obtained versus what law enforcement has obtained. And there's a reason for that, because people don't want to report to law enforcement because it's not safe. The other thing is, if you report it to law enforcement, it's a crime, you're involved in the criminal justice system. Now you have to go to court. Now you have to see your attacker. Now you have to be involved in that process and worry about your safety even more. Some people just want to beg out of that conversation, report it, and get the help that they need privately.
There's a question in the chat about what can we do as bystanders, and I'll just briefly note that there are some wonderful trainings provided by Hollaback in collaboration with A3PCon and Stop AAPI Hate online that you can take. They're very bite-sized and digestible, and gives very, very neat, simplified. I think they have like the 5 Ds in responding to bias as a bystander. I think just generally, and we could spend a whole training on this, but generally know that as a witness, you can bring credibility to someone. So stay on scene, stay around, offer yourself up as an ally, center the victim. Don't do things that you think would be safe. I'm going to call the police because this looks wrong. That would be very unsafe for the victim. So ask them, what would you like me to do? If something is actively going on, create a distraction, drop your coffee, sneeze uncontrollably for a minute. Try to do something that pulls attention away and publicly take the victim publicly safe to safe space and be an ally in that regard. And then if someone does choose to call law enforcement, stay by them, be an ally, boost their voice, but follow their lead and do what they are wanting you to do and not what you want them to do.
Johanna, there's a question about online threatening statements targeting people online. Can those be reported to the hotline?
They absolutely can. Generally, law enforcement sees threats as explicit, specific, and that speak to imminent, which it means about to happen, soon, physical danger. So is it enough to say, you better watch your back? Probably not for a crime, and that's not my decision. I'm the messenger here. I'm delivering the information. Is it scary? Is it not okay? Is it a threat in Johanna's book? Absolutely. But so if there are threats, I would generally encourage you to report to law enforcement, knowing that they're looking for explicit, specific, and speaking to imminent physical danger. If you decide that they're not those things, you can absolutely refer them or report them to the hotline. And generally, I would encourage allies to make a report to the hotline, whether it's by phone or on our website. But if you're someone from dominant culture, think about the resources that are available that are specifically set aside for folks who are LGBTQ, for folks who are from our BIPOC communities, or from our disability communities, or our religious minority communities. And although this, you may experience a harm as a witness, you will experience a harm as a witness. Think about centering community and centering resources for folks who are most harmed in these situations. And so certainly if you need support, I'm not trying to discourage folks from getting support on the hotline, but if you are able to make a report online, then perhaps and not ask for a lot of resources in return, at least for now, while we have one person working the hotline. Perhaps that's one way that you can center and promote services for folks in our communities impacted by inequity. So do folks have other questions?
Let's see, I think we captured them all. Someone asked about whether people didn't know about this information. Is there a way for the general public to get that? We did put out a public service announcement. It came out, unfortunately, January of 2020, right before the pandemic hit. So I'm not sure how many people saw it, but it was on television and on radio for the whole year. And still people didn't see it. And so we have done, in 2020, we're able to do a little bit of outreach, meetings like this, trying to meet with groups, trying to get the word out, meeting with law enforcement. We have online trainings that we're trying to raise up, but because our unit is so small, we barely have time to work on that work, to get those trainings up and running, to help people and inform people about the law and about our work. So the state runs TRIM. We're trying to get more help so we can, do the things we've been charged with doing.
So Faye, we do have a part 2 to our presentation,
Okay.
and that is some scenarios, sort of talking folks through building some response and knowledge of government and being prepared for opportunities to intervene and support folks.
All right, so I thought it would be, we've been talking about, this stuff abstractly. Sometimes the law can be abstract. We know not everyone's trained in this legalese, in these ideas, but you do see, and you are on the ground, and you do see what's going on in your community. So I thought I would just put out some scenarios and to kind of ask ourselves questions about, is this a bias law? Is this a bias crime? Is this a bias, or is it a bias incident? Or is it something else? And I'd like you to think about if you were a witness to it or you experienced it, who you thought you might call. So again, this is kind of a review for what the bias classes that are protected under our bias crime and bias incident law. Color. So all of those: color, disability, gender identity, national origin, race, religion, and sexual orientation. Those are the only ones, but as you can see, if you search through the data on the data dashboard, you will see that people call the hotline about many kinds of bias outside of these protected classes. People call to report many things based on, their houselessness status, their employment status, their age, their political affiliation. So while there might have been some bias happening, it was not bias that was the type that was contemplated under this statute. That does not mean we just hang up on folks. We do engage with folks and help get them, connect them to appropriate services and that sort of thing. So just want to have those fresh in your mind. And then we're going to throw up on the slides some scenarios, and we can kind of walk through them. So a person in the neighborhood walks past your house where you're sitting on your porch. Person turns around and yells to you, "Go back to your country." Is this a bias crime? Is this the type of serious incident for which we kind of know where the person, we don't know who they are, but we could identify the person if the police came? That's the person who said it to me. Probably not a bias crime. The person hasn't threatened your property, hasn't threatened you, hasn't threatened your family, hasn't put hands on you. The person has said something to you that's offensive, and they said it to you perhaps thinking that you're not from this country. Does that change your analysis as to whether this is some type of bias because you were born here? Again, it doesn't. That the person, the bigot, is wrong in their perception of who you are doesn't matter. But it's not a bias crime. Is it a bias incident? So our protected classes, maybe the one based on national origin might be implicated here. So you could actually call the hotline to report, hey, I'm sitting on my porch, walking by, minding my own business. Some jerk yells at me to go back to my country. I feel terrible about this. I don't know why this person did this to me, and contact the Bias Hotline. You can talk to Johanna, report that. She would get the details after giving you her informed consent preamble, and take those details from you. And we would then log a bias incident that occurred in Clackamas County. We are not able to drill down to Lake Oswego, that detailed level of information, but we could place it in Clackamas County. Who would you call for help? You could call the Bias Hotline for help. And depending on what your needs are, Johanna could connect you to a community-based organization if you had that need. Anybody have any questions about why that isn't a bias crime and is more likely a bias incident? All right, I don't see anything in the chat. Okay. This is a bias crime, a bias incident, or is it something else? You notice a racist sticker stuck on the walkway sign at an intersection in your town. It doesn't have any mention about whether we saw who did it. So the likely culprit can't be found. And maybe you could call the police. Maybe they would look at a camera and see who might have done it. But it's likely the police will look at this and say, you know what, that's a sticker. We're gonna come and get it scraped off. It's a racist sticker. I'm sorry that happened to you, but it's not a crime to us. Yeah, it may have damaged this property a little bit. The sticky stuff got on the metal cabinet, but that can be scraped off. It's not really damaged. And we're not gonna take a report. You could contact the Bias Hotline and report that as a bias incident. That type of item does need to be removed. It may be a bit of a project figuring out who owns that walkway at the intersection in terms of who would you call to have it removed, and that could be a project, or you could probably remove it yourself. But you could probably get the city involved, and they could do that research to find out who the light belonged to, or maybe it's ODOT and they could come and remove it. But the idea is it's not a crime if you didn't know the perpetrator who stuck it there. Anything else you want to add, Johanna, around that slide?
I think just the fact that, for law enforcement responding to some of these, they don't necessarily, they don't, period, get to determine what is criminal and what is not. They could be equally offended by the go back to your country comment. And so it's not a statement on as to their values. They operate within the scope of what the law allows.
Thank you. All right, is it a bias crime, a bias incident, or is it something else? On the day the witnesses to a serious bias crime are scheduled to testify, a noose is found hanging in the courthouse, and we will say that it's September 1st of 2021. By now, the governor has passed that noose as a display of a hate symbol into law. Would that be a crime? Yes. Intimidation crime? Yes. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Bias incident? No threat. Okay, that must be a prior question. Yes. So prior to, this would be disturbing if anybody saw it, and I'm sure that there's probably some crime that the prosecutor could hang on a person should they find this thing in and around the courthouse. But if the intent was to intimidate that person, those witnesses that were coming in to testify, this law that is about to be passed was in effect, this would definitely be classified as a bias. This would be a bias crime. It'd be a misdemeanor under the law. The person if they found it and held them responsible, would be spending up to 364 days in jail. Okay, who we call for help? You can always contact the Bias Hotline to report this. The witnesses would certainly, if they're going to court, they would have support from the District Attorney's Victim Assistance Program. Those folks, they have advocates who come to court with a bias crime victim and their family to support them in this process. Some of those services are more robust around the state, and our goal is to help those offices get their advocates up to speed in doing this work. Does intimidation have to be proven? It does have to be proven. Well, we would say bias. The bias would have to be proven to be part of the motivation for the crime. It can be whole or in part. So let's take this noose hanging, for example. They did this hanging from the courthouse. Say they found a member of the defendant's family hung this noose and said, you know, the person who was responding was a person of color, a Black person who was coming to court to testify about their Black family member that was assaulted by a white person, and this noose was sent there to send a message to this person potentially about their fate. You know, knowing that you would have to prove in part that the reason for the noose being hung was to intimidate that witness. You'd have to prove some piece of that.
And Faye, I'll just note that a lot of the times when one act occurs, there are multiple crimes implicated. So if somebody hangs a noose on September 1st, 2021, that would be the crime of hanging a noose with the intent of intimidation, or whatever the crime will be called. And it also may be tampering with a witness.
Tampering with a witness, yep.
Tampering with a witness is a felony, whereas the noose crime is a misdemeanor. And so part of crime victim rights under Oregon law and Oregon Constitution allow for victim voice to be heard. And so when folks are targeted, victimized with this type of conduct, there are, as you mentioned, victim advocates in the DA's office whose job it is to be experts on victim rights, to help you assert those rights to be heard. If the DA is, how the DA is going to charge it, what plea offer the DA is going to make, how one might allocate to the court in a victim impact statement. So there are resources in every county in this state associated with the DA's office. They're required to fund at least one, and in Clackamas County, I think there are 10 advocates who work with crime victims through the criminal justice process.
I think I'm going to do one more, and then I want to talk about our call to action. All right. Is bias crime a bias incident or something else? A sign supporting Blue Lives is defaced, but the owner has no idea who did it. Is that a bias crime? Is it a bias incident, or is it something else? Who is a victim here? Who would you call for help? So it's a sign. It's about Blue Lives, which we have, right? Somebody says, it's not a protected class. Not a protected class. That's absolutely right. It's something else. You know, criminal mischief, vandalism, something, but it's not a crime. It's not a crime. It's not a protected class, and we don't know who did it. So likelihood, police coming out, they might listen to you, but they're not likely to take a report. They'll tell you they're sorry, but nothing they can do about it. When we've had a lot of Black Lives Matter signs have been defaced and destroyed and went missing. We have a lot of reports of that over the past year, and helping folks see that. Try to help people understand the police's response that the sign is about politics and not about race has been challenging. So we can talk a little bit more about that. One of the things that Willie asked us to do was to make sure we put a call to action. I understand you folks are action oriented and monthly go out and do things to support anti-racism. So we're talking about you on the ground in Lake Oswego with your local law enforcement. You have an opportunity to know who those officers are. You have an opportunity to meet them, understand their protocols. You can call them up. Hey, if I have a bias incident in my community, how do you respond? How does the department respond? Do you have a a dedicated person or personnel who specializes in bias response that I can talk to. These are questions that you can ask about each and every law enforcement agency in Clackamas County. They usually have a community relations and engagement officer. The sheriff's officer actually has, Clackamas County Sheriff's Office has 5 of these positions, 2 filled by women, and I think at least 3 people of color. And these are folks that you can talk to and inquire about what the bias response is. These folks should know, and they'll be a good indicator of how much the line officers know about our bias response. So I think you can figure out on the ground, who are the actors? Do they have the information that they need to respond appropriately to bias crimes and bias incidents in their community? If not, why not? You recognize there's a problem, you recognize there's an information gap. What are you going to do to train and get people informed about what their responsibilities are? We encourage you to learn what your community-based resources are, so that if you witness bias and someone reports it to the hotline, you can also say to that person, hey, you know what? I can't help you, but there's a community-based organization that works with, bias, just to support bias victims. And here's their number, or they're over on this street. So as an organization, you knowing what those supports are and where they are can be really helpful. You can tell as members of educated, wealthy, privileged folks, you can, and with time, you can say, I'm a community member, and I would like to know what your protocols are for responding bias. If they don't have any, you can volunteer to engage. You can propose a community law enforcement-based diversity advisory team, and you can help them with this work so that you work together. And that's, I think, the important piece, is that it's not fully the cop's responsibility, it's not the community's responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility to address this problem and come to the table with solutions, and make sure that your local law enforcement is abiding by a prescribed bias response protocol, and that they are working with specific populations in the community and allocate resources to address the problem. So my ask is, do one or many or all of those things, so that you have a working knowledge of what your local law enforcement is doing, and certainly volunteer. Okay. Of course I remember you. Okay, does anyone have, oh yes. We had some more information here, but it looks like we have run out of our time. But we're always happy to come back, and we'll put our contact information in the chat so you can connect with us. So happy to see you and be able to be a part of this this community. So thank you. No. Trying to multitask. Shame on me. I have a hard time with that. Okay. I'm going to silence my mic and hand it back over to. Oh, there it is.
Willie, you're muted.
Okay, I'll do it again. Thank you, Johanna. Is that right? So I apologize for my earlier pronunciation of your name. And thank you to Faye. We will be contacting you, the to come back. This is a lot to digest and try to figure out what's what. So we will be in touch with you. Thank you for the planning team, our young people that helped tonight. Let's see. Who is doing announcements? Is Terry on board and ready?
Yes, I am.
Oh, wait a minute. Did I forget something else? I forgot a poll. Ooh. Okay, the last poll. Did you learn something new this evening? Yes or no? And did you hear a different perspective? We just want some feedback. I don't know how I muted myself again. I think there's a little munchkin that's someplace hitting the button. Okay, so let's have our results of the poll. Okay, 98% of the people said they had learned something new, and 93% said that they heard a different perspective. So thank you, Faye and Johanna. You did your job. Okay, Terry, you're on, I think.
Sure, thank you. Okay, so I think all of you should have received an email earlier today with most of these announcements, but I'm going to go over the highlights for you. The Department of Justice is having their annual community conversations, and there's a link to those if you want to participate. They'll be in June and in July, so check that email. And also all of the Pride events that are going on are on a calendar in a link in your email. Respond to Racism and the LO Library are starting their 3-book discussion series, and the first one is on June 13th, and you need to register to participate. And the book is Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl by Harriet Jacobs. And I think you heard earlier, Willie mentioned that we're going to be doing story time on June 14th and June 21st. So register for that, always at 5 p.m. on Monday evening. There's a special city council meeting coming up on June 22nd at 3 p.m. and I hope you'll register to attend. I think it's possible that it's going to be in person, and also it will be on the city's YouTube channel. So if you can't attend, you don't want to be there in person, you can watch it live on YouTube, or you can watch the replay on YouTube. The reason why it's a special meeting is because it's going to be the final report of the Lake Oswego Community Policing dialogue and consultation project that's been going on for the past several months. And so it'll have findings and recommendations. So we're very interested to hear about that. We have on Friday, June 18th from 5 to 7:30 p.m. Respond to Racism, along with LO for Love, and along with The Living Room are hosting Queer Black Movie Night. So watch your email and social media for the location, but it will start at 5 p.m. on Friday, June 18th. And Juneteenth. Willie mentioned Juneteenth. I'm going to run down, since we have a couple of minutes, I'm going to run down the agenda for Juneteenth, or the program, just so you can get excited with the rest of us, because we're really pleased with how the program came together. So the celebration starts at 4:30 at Millennium Park and will last until 6:30 or later, depending on how long we keep the open mic open. It's going to start with remarks from none other than our community elder and badass activist, Willie Poinsett. I like that title, Willie. Mayor Joe Buck and City Councilor Maboop are also speaking during the program. Our keynote speaker is community activist Antoinette Edwards. Willie mentioned our DJ and MC is Denmark, who helped us last year and with Juneteenth and also helped us with the car rally. Okay, so the musicians that we have are Randall Wyatt, Conscious Ave, Julianne Johnson-Weiss, and Alex Addy. So we have a variety. We have hip hop and some rap. We have some soul and we have African drummers. So it should really be a lot of fun. We will have poetry reading by our Youth Empowerment Committee members, and then we'll have time for open mic. And Willie mentioned there'll be a kids corner for the kids. We'll have chalk and sign making and COVID, you know, precautions being taken and all of that. So that should be a lot of fun. And I think that's everything. So Pat or Willie or John? Willie, you're on mute.
Okay. All right. Thank you, thank you. We have some new RTR signs that would fit on your side windows, I think, of the car. Some people wanted signs for the car, and so I'll get them to our salespeople, Pat and Terry, and you can, if you want an RTR sign for that, or you could have it for a smaller person, a young person who wants to carry a sign. It's just a smaller version of our regular Rise Up LO. And I think with that, I want to thank, nope, something else.
I forgot one thing. We are going to have a silent walk on the 20th. So Juneteenth on the 19th, and then to help us recover, we'll have a silent walk on the 20th at 4 p.m. at Millennium Park.
Please plan to do that one. We have to keep this country in our thoughts. Strange things happen. So with that, though, I want to thank Faye and Johanna for tonight's presentation. Thank you, Marvin, for doing the Juneteenth. Thank you to our youth, Sarah and Karuna. I don't have your name in front, and I hope I didn't mess it up. Thank you to the planning team, Pat Ginn, Trina, and John, Dawn, and others. How about that?
And Willie.
I was trying to leave my name off, Pat. Anyway, thank you so much for attending. We look forward to seeing you next month. But before then, I look forward to seeing you at Juneteenth or one of the activities. Juneteenth or the silent. If you don't want to be active, then you can come and do the silent walk. It's really, really very healing for you. So with that, good night. Go eat your dinner if you haven't eaten like I haven't, or have a snack, or just rest. Thank you so much for being here. Good night.